Good afternoon and welcome to the January meeting for the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. All board members are present, as well as Marita Kelly, Mike Wood, and our General Counsel, Mike Cassidy. We now turn to the approval of our minutes. Jeffrey distributed the minutes of the December meeting, and I hope you've had a chance to review them. If you have, I'd entertain a motion to approve. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. We are starting the year with a couple of guest speakers today, and it's part of what our goal was as we reduce the number of meetings that we had, that we will have this year. And so we wanted to make sure it was as productive as we could make it. And in light of that, I will pass on making the chair's report and to our first speaker. And our first speaker is from the Keystone Collections Group, with whom Marita and the city work to get guidance on tax projections. And specifically today, we'd love to focus on the EIT and LST as we had some questions relative to those projections for the FY24 year. And joining us via Zoom is Joe Lazaro, the Executive Vice President for Law and Communications at Keystone. And I've heard several beeps, which means there are a couple of other people that have joined you. If you wouldn't mind introducing them.
Absolutely. We have with us today David Kratzenberg. He is Keystone's CEO and is extremely knowledgeable on both our technologies and our operations. In addition, we have Stephanie Melcher. Stephanie is the team lead over our client services department and in charge of bringing our municipal clients their data, information, reports, whatever they're looking for in the client services realm, including one of those important reports, projections, which I believe is something that you want to discuss today.
Yes. And so we'll just turn it over to you, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps just describing your approach and what economic indicators you might rely on to come up with the projections or advise the city as to how large a projection jump to make from year to year.
Sure. Quick introduction as to the earned income tax and the local services tax. In 2010, the legislature moved all of the collection operations to a county-wide system. So Harrisburg participates in the county-wide system of Dauphin County, and under the Dauphin County Tax Collection Committee, Marita Kelly is serving as your delegate to that committee and has a weighted vote based on the size of the city compared to all the other municipalities and taxing authorities, and the revenue generation. So you've got population and tax revenue generation coming together. DCD assigns a weighted vote to everybody. So just a quick background as to how the system, how it operates right now. In Dauphin County, across the board, Keystone has seen really a tremendous earned income tax revenue generation growth over the period from when we began in 2012 to 2023. And included in that is the growth of the city of Harrisburg tax revenue generation. There are some really important driving factors in that. First of all, the conversion early on to mandatory tax withholding out of payroll made an enormous difference. A lot of people forgot to put those numbers on their tax return and send them in back in the days when it wasn't withheld. But people still don't fully report. And one of the things that Keystone has developed is both technology and automation geared toward tax enforcement, compliance, and delinquent recovery. In doing so, you get a double return. You get the tax revenue that's collected for you with penalty and interest at zero commission rate to you, delivered to you in that year that it's recovered. In addition, a vast majority of those delinquents that we discover through our auditing process and our employer compliance process, that those individuals and those businesses don't want to go through that again. So that increases your current year revenue. So we're seeing two factors driving up your annual numbers. A little bit of background on your annual numbers. From January to December of 22, compared side by side with January to December of 23, we saw an increase for the city of Harrisburg of $1,857,745. That's an 11.5% increase. And I'm going to let Stephanie kind of take the discussion here a little bit, or if David wants to jump in. When we have that kind of information, what are we able to do for the city in our projections?
Yeah, so I that's all great information, Joe. I think what Stephanie can do is perhaps describe the process of doing that estimate for next year's collections and what that is based off of, and how they properly weight current versus delinquent. This is a very cyclical tax. You've got 4 quarters and a final return. So it becomes very predictable. These numbers are consistent. And as Joe pointed out, they've been increasing. And Stephanie can point out some of the reasons for that, hopefully, but at least talk about the methodology stuff with how we come up with these projections.
Yeah, of course. So the way we do our projections is based off of your tax data history. We pull the last 8 or so years of your tax collections and we review it for trends. We look at percent differences between each year and just overall how it looks from year to year. So I can say your collections really started to increase the past probably about 3 years. In 2021, they were up 4.5%, which is good. However, 2022 was up 16.5%. But that's not an oddity because 2023 was up 18.9%. So as you can see, you're getting a really nice trend up and up and up from year to year. And to be honest with you, we actually were very, very conservative in the projection we gave to you for 2024 because we only gave you a 3% increase when, as you can see, you're probably going to get a little bit more than that. So yeah, we look at collection history and we actually, 2 of my team members do each projection. So my teammate and I are the ones who completed this projection for you. We did them completely separately. And then we came together and we discussed it. Sometimes our numbers vary and we have to defend ourselves maybe a little bit. However, I will say my teammate and I were spot on with this projection that we gave you. There was really nothing to discuss because we agreed completely in our number.
Stephanie, can you talk about why some of those numbers might be higher, and specifically around the delinquent collection numbers?
Yes, I can. Let me pull up my analysis. So as Joe mentioned, from calendar year 2023 versus 2022, the city's increase was approximately $1.86 million. And of that, about $540,000 of it was our delinquent earned income tax. As Joe mentioned, our audit process is really stellar, and that's how much money we increased for you in those delinquencies. The other remaining amount that I found for about $1.3 million was just your overall taxpayers. Sometimes I can find one or two taxpayers that maybe got a large bonus or moved into the city, but I could not pinpoint it to only a few taxpayers. It really is just your overall taxpayers making more money.
And Stephanie, can you also give the information regarding resident versus non-resident tax and what portion, what that breaks down to in that increase?
Yeah, so that 1.3 million, I'm sorry, is all resident money. The non-resident increase was about 23,000. So I honestly didn't even include it in the analysis because it was not as significant as the audit or the resident money.
Okay. Yeah, that commuter portion of that tax, it's important to note that there wasn't any large swings in that data or any anomalies there. So this is very, like you said, very cyclical and very predictable, and you start to see these trends. The one thing that is important from a budgeting perspective is the differentiation between tax year and calendar year. And that's also something that we look at as well. You know, the calendar year will encompass portions of 2 tax years. So in 2024, we're going to be collecting the fourth quarter of 2023 and the first 3 quarters and the final return money for 2023, as well as the first 3 quarters for 2024. So when we do that analysis, we actually look at those particular tax year quarter combinations so that they're appropriately balanced in the projection for the tax year or for the calendar year of 2024. We threw a lot of numbers and a lot of information at you. Do you have any questions as to our process methodology or the numbers themselves?
I would just say to Stephanie, I'd love to see someone pay $1 million and have you pinpoint them as the reason that they went up. That would be a nice addition to our overall pool. I had a question, and Stephanie referred to it a little when it's not local. Are you referring to the LST monies when you said that?
No, the
Because-
non-resident EIT is what David referred to as the commuter
Okay.
tax.
Okay,
We
Yeah,
could
that would
discuss
be
Sorry, go ahead, David.
under Act 511. It's withheld at the greater of the two, either the resident rate of where they live or the non-resident rate and where they work. So if they're living in an area that doesn't impose a tax, you receive all of that. If they impose a 1% tax, then you're getting the balance of that. But as we pointed out, there hasn't been any large swings in that information. So your commuter taxes are pretty stable there. That's different than the local services tax, the LST amounts.
Where we do see a change, and we watch this every quarter at least, when we see a noticeable, measurable change, we look into it to try to find out if there is a shift in either the non-resident, the commuter tax, or in the earned income tax. A big employer left, or as the chair mentioned here, the $1 million wage earner decided, I'm moving out of Harrisburg. I'm going to go live in Hershey. You know, something like that happens. We want to see what is the cause, and we most of the time are able to track that down. And we let you know.
questions? Comments?
If I can. The only question I have is obviously these last few years have seen a significant increase in tax revenue for the city of Harrisburg. Are you seeing similar trends for the other municipalities that you collect for in the Harrisburg area? Or is Harrisburg's success unique amongst this region?
Yes, we certainly have seen it. We've seen it. And honestly, I look at counties that are not collected by Keystone because we have access as public record to all the auditing across the state. We have seen the Keystone tax collection committees across the board see increases, some significantly more than others. All are up. And I'm going to share some information with you in a second. I was just asked one of my colleagues to go get some information for you that I based on your question, I'd like to share with you. But yeah, we check all of that, and we are seeing it. And Dauphin County is up significantly over the years since Keystone's taken over, including the city.
There are obviously regional impacts based upon large employers either moving in or moving out, but we're not seeing that in Harrisburg. But what we are seeing is just a constant increase, and we're attributing a lot of that to our delinquent enforcement program, which is converting those delinquents into current taxpayers. You know, as the unemployment numbers are staying low, and as wages are increasing, probably to meet the demands of inflation, we're also seeing that contribute to higher earned income tax collections. There's a number of factors that will feed into that, but those are fairly consistent across Dauphin County and all of the areas that Keystone Collections Group represents.
We noticed right away, for instance, in the regions of the state that were heavily dependent upon gas mining, and when those changes occurred and there were a lot of restrictions on that, and the companies had to pull out, we saw the revenue drop. And that's, you know, that's something that they suffered with, and we did our best. Obviously, we went through COVID and spent a lot of time making sure your revenues did not dip. There were a lot of factors that went into that, but both the boost we put on in compliance, because people were cutting what they paid all over the place, and taxes could have been one of the areas. We'd rather they pay their taxes and cut back on their cable options. but yeah, we did put a lot into that to make sure your revenues did not drop during the COVID period. And as you're aware, a lot of employees, in fact, the vast majority, were able to stay on payroll because of the federal government programs. Instead of putting everybody on unemployment, they let them keep their jobs even if they weren't coming in, and the employers were able to get reimbursements after the period was over. So that was a win for everybody, including local governments. If I could share with you, and I'm gonna see if I can get this up here in my screen.
Can we see it?
What you're looking at right there is Dauphin County from 2012 to 2023. And that line follows straight up. That was an earlier question. Did you see that consistently? This is all the municipalities and school districts collectively in Dauphin County, the Dauphin Tax Collection District.
Thank you. That brings it home very clearly.
Sure did.
There are also some other factors that we can look at as well. Publicly sourced information, such as median income, and you look at some of that, you know, population growth or shift. But those publicly available census type data, I think largely supports the increases that we're seeing here on a current basis, augmented with our delinquent enforcement and collections is really where we're seeing all of those numbers kind of come together to form this total increase.
And all the numbers we're discussing today are subject to both independent auditing, Yellow Book audit, your 4 quarters and final return, which we call the 5th quarter, are all thoroughly audited independently, as are our systems, as are our controls, as are your fund protections. So we've got the SOC 1 audit, and we've additionally got the Yellow Book audit. The Yellow Book is mandatory by the state. We really voluntarily want the SOC audit. We want to know our controls are all in place and properly, appropriately working. And we want our clients to know that too.
And if you don't mind me saying, Joe, I was fortunate enough to travel out to Irwin the past 2 summers. And much to David and Joe's chagrin, I asked dozens of questions, and I asked for tours of the plant, and I asked for tours of their IT, and just extraordinarily impressed with the operation, the fact that the SOC audit is so thorough and substantial in terms of IT, because IT is everybody's greatest weakness today. So in fairness, I went out as a very objective viewer and examined things with my own 2 eyes, along with the other executive board members who attended with us, so including the chair, Julie Seeds. So we were out there twice. We were trying to assure that the taxpayers in Dauphin County, particularly the taxpayers in the city of Harrisburg, were well, I won't say protected, but well served is what I meant to say, by this agency.
Thank you, Marie. Marita may say she's objective, but I can tell you she's thorough.
I had a question about the local services tax. Didn't know if that was next on your agenda, or I didn't want to jump the gun.
I assume, Steph, you provided a projection in that tax also? Could you just quickly go over that for the team?
Yeah, of course. We did provide the local services tax projection, and I don't know if you noticed, but it's not the same as the earned income tax in the sense of high increases. It's actually remaining decently stagnant. You had an increase from 22 to 21, but from 23 to 22, it's pretty much the same. And so for our projection, we are pretty much leaving it the same for 24 compared to 23, which is about 6.8 million.
What were the number of increases in employees? I believe it was under 100.
It would have been, my calculation was about 1,000 additional.
1,000. Oh, well, okay.
At least from the projection from the 5-year plan to the 2024
Okay.
budget.
I thought I saw 95 or something in the numbers. But the important thing to realize here is that this goes along with what David addressed earlier. LST, the local services tax, is based upon the number of employees working in the city versus their income. So whether you're whether you're making $200,000 or $20,000, you're paying the same LST. You each count as an employee. So as incomes increase, EIT can increase, but LST does not increase in the same regard. You have to have new business coming in, bringing new employees in, new crews of employees in to generate additional LST.
And that was specifically my observation, because I felt like it went up more than I would have assumed, because you would have had to see some indication that the number of bodies working in the city would have a base that they were coming to.
Yes, and that's exactly what those numbers reflect. How many are working year to year, and we can't change it.
One of the things that we do provide is a comparison with the earned income tax. So if they're reporting working in the city of Harrisburg, then we expect to see those employers remitting LST in kind. So we're doing that analysis on an annual basis. There's many times where employers are aware of the earned income tax and aren't aware of the LST. So we're doing that comparison with the two databases to make sure we get good compliance.
On the LST, do you anticipate any issues arising from the shift to telework?
That's an interesting discussion, and there, I think, even some legislative efforts to try to clarify that. Joe, I don't know if you could speak any more on that in detail.
Yeah, that's a very significant issue in the city of Philadelphia, where their commuter tax is approaches 4 times the local tax in the suburban areas. And obviously the tax crediting wipes out the suburban areas. They receive nothing, all those communities around Philly, because anybody who works in the city pays it all to the city. Now that people are working remotely back in Bucks County, Montgomery County, Delaware County, et cetera, they're looking to see that tax increase. The legislation is actually geared to those who don't physically move workplace out of the city, but they are looking for what the school districts receive in those suburban areas, reimbursement of lost earned income tax when the city takes it. So they're looking for, actually, it's not something that would carry any weight in Harrisburg. Harrisburg, you obviously the earned income tax is based on your residence, who's living here, and based on the non-res portion of the tax is based on who's coming into the city physically to work, or is at least on the payroll and marked as working for a business based in the city. And then the local services tax is entirely based on working in the city. Doesn't matter where you live. Where you live is irrelevant. So those are really the 3 differences between the earned income tax resident, earned income tax non-resident or commuter, and the LST. So how does the remote change things? Well, it changes workplace location. And if somebody's working in a new location by Pennsylvania law for 90 consecutive days, they tried to base it on a quarter, then they are to be counted. The employer's job is to count them as working in the new jurisdiction. We haven't seen a whole lot of that kind of movement in the city, because you're talking about your residents on the earned income tax. Well, their workplace location hasn't really changed.
Anecdotally, what we saw, especially in the early goings of COVID, in that work from home, is the employers viewed it as temporary. And so they just left the employer in that particular workplace location, even though they may have been working from home. As that expanded, it's been a mix. I can tell you that some employers are lazy, and they just will leave that workplace location at their corporate office or wherever their office that they were working in. What's interesting about that is it is self-reporting. We do not have the ability to validate where somebody works. Part of earned income tax, we have the ability to validate PSD or resident location based upon their address. But the statute, Act 32 in particular, does not require a physical address for where somebody works. So it really is a self-reporting process for the employers to tell us collectors where they're working.
All they give us is a code that matches the city of Harrisburg. And if that's not the code they're putting down, we have no way of knowing that it should have been the city of Harrisburg and they put somebody else's code down. Until the state fixes that law, and they require it for the resident, for the where you live, but they don't require it for where you work, and they should, because it's a lot of this tax is based on where you work.
But I think in fairness to the employers, the fact that a lot of telework is a blended opportunity.
That's right.
Means it isn't linear in any way or easily defined as one or the other.
Yes. Very, very correct statement. We see a lot of, all right, we're going to give this group the right to work at home on Mondays, and then this group gets to work remote on Tuesdays. There's no way they're going to be breaking that information down. Not on payroll.
Can you explain the 90 consecutive days, You said something about them? If they telework and if they work 90 consecutive days. At
If
home?
they, if
Please.
they work 90 consecutive days in a new location, the employer is required by law to change the political subdivision code for a workplace location to where they're working for those 90 days. It was honestly, my understanding is it was put into the law to cover those gas well mining where the crews came in from Texas and West Virginia to Greene County and maybe up north in Tioga County. And they knew to keep it less than 90 days on a crew so that they didn't have to pay any tax. And that's how that statute was written that way. But that's the story in Harrisburg, is how that law got amended that way. But that's the number they kind of came up with and put it in. But the law, the way it's interpreted by the tax preparers is, if you have an employee who moves to a new location for 90 days or more, that then changes their workplace location.
Well, on the other hand, making them come into work for one day a month.
Yeah. That's the problem, because nobody hasn't gone to court. Nobody's tried to interpret that, at least for all of us, for the tax officers and honestly for the employers. How are they supposed to treat that? And most of them are treating it, as David said, they're not going to take the effort to change anything. They're just going to leave it on the books as original workplace location. Stays the same.
We are doing best effort there by cross-referencing it with the earned income tax data, as I mentioned earlier. But the workplace location has always been a challenge around both earned income tax and LST, because there's really no requirement for the employer to provide us any information where we can go and validate that the code that they're using is 100% accurate.
Any other questions, comments? Well, Joe, we really appreciate your and Dave and Stephanie's time to help explain and help us understand more how the city derives its projections. And I think it certainly gives me more confidence to know what it's based on and how thoroughly you vet it relative to other cities and municipalities in the area. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Happy to join you today.
Thanks,
All
Joe. Thanks, Dave.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Nice
Thank
talking
you.
with you.
Have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
The Marita has often said how much she appreciates having Keystone at her disposal to vet what she sees happening. And I know she and Brian want to make sure that they're not out over their skis with their projections. So thank you for suggesting that we have them
I thought this would be
zoom in.
helpful. I mean, there are certainly many other factors we use besides just
Yeah.
their data, but their data has helped guide us. And also because I do attend the quarterly Dauphin County tax collection meetings where Joe gives that same report at every meeting. And he's saying 11%, 11%, 11% all last year. And I went to Brian, I'm like, they're saying 11%, Brian. Now that was for every municipality, like overall
Yeah.
Dauphin County, but Harrisburg was a big portion of that. So I knew that 2% or 3% was, I mean, realistically, if you look at everything, it's just too low. But again, we don't like to overestimate either. We try to find that appropriate middle ground where we're giving you realistic, extensive data, but also, and we also consult with the controller, Bill Lineberger's done a marvelous job historically for the last, I don't know, 20 years probably, providing excellent data to us. And the controllers, with good reason, is very conservative in his projections, and we respect that, and we like to heed to his advisement. And so we just try to take every piece of information, but again, as I have to remind you, it is that indeed a forecast. So hitting it right on the exact number is a little tough, but we try our very best. We try to be as honest as we can, and we try to provide our backup data and footnotes, as we call them for you, so that you know kind of what we use to derive those numbers. And I have to give Tim Brooks also, credit because he contributed largely as well as Brian and the rest of the team.
Marita, it was mentioned that the voting on that committee is proportional. Do you know off the top how much, what our vote is compared to the rest of the county?
Well, Central Dauphin gets the highest vote because they're the largest population. It's based on the population. I don't know the specifics with me. I should have
Yeah.
thought to bring that with me, but I didn't. I was trying to prepare in other ways, but I certainly can get it for the next meeting or send it out to the board. But yeah, it is definitely a weighted vote for the city.
Interesting.
Unless, Mike, do you know?
You're correct. I don't recall the
Yeah.
specifics of every little municipality.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But we're in the top three,
Yeah, top three.
after, of course, Lower Paxton, Central Dauphin area. That's.
Thank you.
Good segue.
Yeah, good, great segue.
Audrey.
Yes,
Chair Carter.
right.
I
Audrey's
have one
fine.
question, and I was being shy. I'm sitting up front. I should have sat up.
Yeah,
front.
you should have.
We can confirm this later. Like they made estimate when Stephanie said 6.8 million for LST and the EIT too. I was thinking, I think they mean like their gross amount, because again, there's the commission. It's not material, it's not a very material difference, but that does play a role in how we project the budget. So when they say 6.8 million, like it's a nice round number, I think they mean that's the gross number. The city doesn't actually receive that in cash. It's netted down by a related commission.
Got it.
So,
but the commission's reasonable.
but we can confirm it.
Yeah.
That's-
You're correct. You're correct, Brian.
Makes sense.
We're getting ready to renegotiate with Keystone, and they've agreed to keep their commission to what it was, I believe, in 2016. So we're pretty pleased with that. I mean, it still has to be voted upon, but their commission is, I don't have that number either, but it's like 3.5. It's not something outrageous. It's pretty reasonable. But I can get both pieces of information for you. Tried to bring as much as I could, but.
We asked weird questions.
No, not at all. We just, it's just hard to predict time. I don't want to have a hernia, can't. But anyway, thank you all for your patience, and now we have our next experts on EIT and LST coming up who will
And
knock your socks off.
I'll just, and maybe Brian knows, I'll ask one final question relative to the IT. They made the point that it increased 1.8 million, and of that, 540,000 was delinquent.
Covered delinquents from previous years.
And we're very good at digging into the public works funds. I mean, how much is there in delinquency, and are they so good that we're getting close to zero? Or is
Oh, they're
there,
excellent. You ask anybody, you mention the name Keystone to any taxpayer in Dauphin County, and they're like, I hate them. And when they say they hate the tax collector, that's good news to you, because they're and he's right, and they'll detach your wages as quick as you can say, detach wages, and they'll do it, and they have done it, so. I mean, I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm sympathetic to those who are struggling, I didn't mean to imply that, but the fact is, if the taxes are due, they need to be paid, and this group is pretty good at pursuing it.
I was just, it stood out to me that it was almost, what is that? It's at least 25%. That seemed large, and if you're continuing to project that, how big must the
To hold-
gross
to
number?
hold its ground.
Yeah,
Throughout. I don't know that differentiation between the two, what's current and what's not. But on those reports that we do get, that information is available. They break it down
okay.
on their, I think it's on their monthly reports that they do.
It is.
It's detailed. So that's something we can follow up.
It'd just be fun to see what that, how close to zero we're getting.
And I don't think that that's gonna go up like this, the delinquent,
Yeah.
because I think it is starting to flatten out because they are so good. And like they said, that the value of going after someone is not that you want to go after someone, but then it kind of reminds them, oh,
Oh.
yes, if I pay it on time and I don't, put it off and I don't do this, that, or the other thing, then
It won't be as
so
awful
it
as the
helps with
last time.
compliance is my
Right.
point. I think Joe tried to make that
Did.
point. I'm not sure.
He did,
But I do think that they're, like I said, when you ask somebody and everybody shudders when you mention their name, you know that that's a good sign that you're getting your money. And I meant everywhere, Dauphin, it doesn't matter if you're in Derry, you're in Dauphin Borough, you're in anywhere in Dauphin County. And if they're your collector, they're gonna be tough.
It's like one of those ambulance chasers, the law firms ad, where they say, oh, they're being represented by so-and-so. Anyway, back to the great segue that I derailed. Next on our agenda is a discussion or presentation of collection trends in the city vis-a-vis the mercantile taxes and the business privilege taxes. And I'd like to welcome Michael Hughes, who's the tax and enforcement administrator for the city. And you brought a colleague, and if you wouldn't mind introducing her, that'd be great. And you can move up if you want.
Deputy Tax Administrator for the city.
Janelle, is that what you said?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
We have a handout, plus we have a drive. Is there a way to plug it or not? If not, we can just go off the handout.
Try, I don't know, everything might explode.
Thank you. We don't have to. We can look at the handout.
Okay, the handout's better. Low tech is always the best way.
I'm sorry, Marita, I don't have anything.
You know the
I'll
number.
come to
You
Audrey.
can share.
You know that.
I know how I rank with you, Janelle.
I'm sorry.
I'm teasing you. Audrey's generous enough.
Yeah. Over to you.
All right, good afternoon. Once again, Mike Hughes, Tax Administrator, City of Harrisburg. And, Keystone just spoke. I'll say a little bit. I mean, we also work closely with them. Reached out to them years ago. We get a monthly report from them on new businesses, so we compare that to our data. And, there's some in there, we assimilate them in with ours, and we also reciprocate with them if they ask for the same data. Another item which we'll get to about that 500,000, we have a 500,000 item you'll see, and I'll be able to explain it more. It might help, at least from our perspective. You'll see what that was about, but it might not be the same reasoning that Keystone has had. But anyway, on the first page, we have our overall, and I went back to 2019 just to put context on it and to show the effect of the pandemic on our numbers. Which are, obviously different than Keystone's because of the nature of what we collect. I think in the past, you've been given the total numbers at the bottom of that chart over those years. Most recently, in 2023, 7.8 million. But this has the breakdown, so you can kind of see the differences between the mercantile business tax, the amusement tax, and the parking tax, and the different impacts that the pandemic and other items have had on those items. All right, so, but you can see we were at 7.7 in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, our overall number went down to 6.9. And as we started climbing out of the pandemic, we also started, returning our number back to where it should be. And we were at 7.8 million total for 2023, based on these items listed. But we'll get into it in a little more detail. So if you look at the bottom, it's just the mercantile business tax. On that particular item, you can see in 2019 where we were at 2.8, and we've been steadily increasing up through 22, and it flattened out a little bit this past year. We're just a little short of an increase from 22 to 23, but still close at 3.257. Some of it could have been the timing of some of the payments that, in the Treasury Department and so forth. But we were really close on that particular item. We'll get into the predictions for next year. We do expect that to increase. So But on the next slide, we actually break it down in really more detail. So this was actually, we break it down between the current year tax and the prior year tax that we collect. So this is actually the prior year tax. And on this chart, you can see we really peaked. We collected 522,000 in year 2021, which was prior year delinquencies. So, and the reason for us that spiked at that point in time, it was the pandemic. So in 2020, around March, when that hit, they closed the doors of the city. We still kept coming to work, but we had no customers coming in, taking our time away from all that we do. So we were able to focus heavy on audits through that period, the whole pandemic. And as a result, we were able to really hit on a lot of the delinquents and collected that money. And like I said, it peaked 2021. It kind of continued strong. It went in half, but then we've been maintaining in the 200,000 plus range, 22 and 23. I mean, I don't think we'll see something like 2021 where we were able to devote so much time to auditing, but that was a good cleanup period for us. So, and then down below in the penalty, kind of similar, that kind of peaked in 21, leveled back off, increased a slight amount. But it's been a pretty steady amount over the 5-year period, between 130 and 220 on the penalty. So next slide, interest is somewhat similar, because of the delinquent collections, penalty interest, also spiked and then leveled back down and, been consistently in the $30,000 to $80,000 range for all those 5 years. So now down below on the amusement tax, that's a whole different type of tax, a tax on admissions. So it has the inverse from the pandemic. Once the pandemic hit in March, it started to completely tank because there was no in-person events at the farm show, baseball games, so forth, that pay the amusement tax, on the charge at the door or ticket collections. So we kind of bottomed out in 21 at the peak of the pandemic. And then once things started happening again, events, it started rebounding back. And 2023, we've hit the highest number that we've ever had in the amusement tax. So that's a good sign there. Similarly with the parking tax, not as bad, but clearly we were at an all-time high in 2019 on the parking tax at 4.2 million. Then the pandemic hit and that number started sliding. It kind of bottomed out towards the end of 2021, down at 3.3, started working its way back, 3.6, and we were at 3.7 in 2023. Keystone has spoke about it, someone else about the state workers, 1 day a month doesn't quite cut it from the parking tax perspective of getting back to where we once were. We've been fortunate on some leases long-term that have sustained this number. But when we had the crowds in the city 2019 and prior, and the garages were filled and people spilled out to all the other lots that pay the tax, things were a lot better, of course, but we've clearly not gotten back to where we once were at the 2019 numbers. And even though we are forecasting a slight increase in the 2019 numbers, I think it's gonna take a couple years to get back to there. That's assuming people do come back to work. And then of course there's potentially a new parking system that's going to be taken over. So we're going to see how that all plays out, if there's any increases and that type of thing. But I still think it's a couple years away before we get back to 2019 numbers on the parking tax. Slide below that, we also want to let you know we do collect for the school district. We receive a commission for that. We only collect mercantile and amusement for them. And that slide shows the amount we collected for them in 2023. Their one tax rate is lower than ours, so the amount collected is a little lower than we collect for the city there, so. Last page, just informational. Keystone spoke about their delinquent collections. So we have our own auditing program we talked about last year. Primarily Janelle collected about 700,000 from desk audits mainly. And also then for our delinquents, we have 2 paralegals in our office. So we actively pursue delinquents civilly. We attended 73 hearings just last year at the local DJ's office. We collected over 400,000 as a result of the civil collections. Some of the other items that we also do in our office, we issue brand new licenses to incoming businesses. So in 2023, we issued 501 new mercantile business licenses. So 501 new businesses either started within the city or businesses coming into the city to do work in 2023. We also issued 191 new landlord licenses and 226 new vendor licenses last year. So as far as the revenue trends, obviously we looked at certain state data and national. Our tax kind of goes a lot in step with economics. So if the economy is doing good, people are making more, businesses is doing well, the tax tends to flow the same way. We also had an uptick in construction projects over the last couple of years. A lot of you, especially local people, federal courthouse, archives, Catherine Hershey School, roadway project, that all brings in good tax revenue at our higher tax rate. So as long as we have ongoing construction projects, which we have for the last couple of years, we're able to continue to maintain, pretty consistent tax collection on the mercantile tax. We did have some businesses leave, a couple larger ones. As a result, they were displaced from the roadway project. So it'll be a little bit of a loss there, but we feel it'll be offset, by economic factors, increasing the tax, and by some of the newer ongoing projects that we expect to continue for several years in Harrisburg. So I think there's anything else I wanted to mention as far as that goes at the moment. But if anyone had any specific questions, we're glad to answer them next.
Questions?
Thank you, Michael, for coming today. If you could just give us, we're not quizzing you, but if you just give us some idea about, you mentioned the difference in tax rates between the city and the school district. Give us some idea how the taxes are calculated, for example, the mercantile tax versus the amusement tax. Is it a percentage or a scale?
Sure,
Something.
exactly. So first, it's called the mercantile business privilege tax. So technically, mercantile has a rate, business privilege has a rate. And then within mercantile, there's wholesale and retail is a category, and then business privilege has its own category. So on our tax returns, we actually have 3 different lines depending on the nature of the business. And we pre-mark them with an X based on how the person filled out their initial application. So business privilege for the city is 0.002 or 2 mils. And we can only collect 1 mil for the school district. So in total, 3 mils for that. Retail for the city, we collect 0.00075. And the same for the school district there. And then wholesale is 0.0005. So it's lower at the wholesale, and retail business privilege is the highest tax rate. But luckily, contractors, consultants, attorneys, so forth, pay at the business privilege rate, so that's really where we see most of our increases at. Retail kind of shifted a long time ago, those numbers aren't growing, like the business privilege sector is. So, but we do send out a 2-part tax form. We have the city portion and the school district portion on it, and it spells out all the different rates there, different classifications. So we do have taxpayers that have multiple classifications. They could have all three or some combination thereof. But we look at that during our audits each year. And if we have to make changes, we'll do so accordingly.
And those are percentage of gross.
Gross receipts.
Receipts.
Yes, gross receipts before any deductions.
Why I need to.
So that's the business privilege mercantile tax. Then the amusement tax, we collect 10%, 5% for the city, 5% to the school district. And parking tax is 20%.
Sort of like a sales tax, it's on top of what they charge the customer. Or
Well, it is similar to a sales tax because the person that is collecting parking or amusement has to remit it. It's really a tax on the patron.
right.
And then the person's charged with remitting it to us. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
I know the city charges or requires any, I don't want to say it, any construction company or any company coming into the city to get a license, correct?
That's right.
And then they have to pay X% on whatever they're doing. I remember when I had to do this, when you go get your permit, you have to actually state what the project is going to cost. Presumably that gives you some sense of what that entity should be paying. Is that helpful or not?
That's correct. We asked that question on the application. But then that's generally their first year. However, we also, with our current computer system, we have a link over to our codes department. So we can say taxpayer X, what permits did they pull this past year? Hit a button, boom, it shows us all the permits they pulled. So from an audit standpoint, we have a number that they should be filing at least on that amount, the baseline. So we also subscribe to a construction journal. We can run a company's name and list all the projects they've done and the value, and then we'll go off that. And then in addition, Janelle will send out a letter or an email to the general contractor, and we will get a list of all the subcontractors on those projects and follow that same process there. So.
Great. Other questions?
Just a comment. I think these are very nicely done,
Thank you.
especially for people that don't love numbers. Kudos for that.
You did a great job in front of
Yeah.
city council as well, or they both did, I should say.
Well, I believe that I listened to that part of the city council hearing, and I believe someone might have said that if everyone came as prepared as my cute did, this would be a really easy budget hearing.
You
I
definitely did
think
listen.
Right.
We know he's always like a Boy Scout, he's always prepared.
I am an Eagle.
See that? I know.
Well, thank you both very much. We appreciate it, and we appreciate having the charts. This Kathy said, it's easy to know up is good and down is bad, and so that makes it much easier than looking at the numbers. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you both. You're welcome to stay.
Yeah. I did notice that Brian is here, and I forgot that normally we always
He
reserve
does have an
time.
update.
We reserve time on the agenda for the city, and so would you like to come up? And you can always sit up next to Mike if you want. He
There's always
in the
a for you.
future, yeah. Because I know you provide invaluable backup to Marita, so.
I wasn't on the agenda, so I was a little hesitant about it.
You're
If you're okay,
Yeah.
and this will take. This will take in between 5 to 10 minutes. It's not a
Okay, you
major.
start the timer.
Thanks, Brian, and you did include a copy. No, I'm teasing you now.
I thought this would be good just because of its natural, it's a year-end summary wrap up for the city, for the general fund. And the top page is just a single schedule that reflects when we were going through our budget hearings back in December, one of those hearings, I can't remember which, we did a presentation of a projection, how we thought things were going to be shaping up for the end of the year. And this first schedule, I've just replicated that projection. And what stands out, like now that we have actual numbers, our end of year cash position or cash fund balance. We projected 19.2. We ended up with a little over 19.6. And that kind of dovetails to, we asked council and they approved it. We increased our medical expenditure line because we were a bit fearful. We had been going through significant, extraordinary medical claims throughout the year. So we budgeted a little bit higher, thinking there might be another big hit coming, which fortunately that did not happen. So we end up with, as I mentioned, over 19.6 at the end of 23. The open encumbrance balances, and I'm looking at the actual column right now. That number is quite large, almost 5 million in open encumbrances. That could be subject to change because we're currently working through that to have people review these open encumbrances just to be sure. Some of them may not actually be needed for this year, so that number could go down, which would be a good thing. But that's what the system is reflecting at the end of 23, and that gives you the end of your budgetary fund balance of 14.6. The thing about this schedule too, like throughout the year, we anticipated using fund balance at a total amount that was almost 14.9 million. And actually, fortunately, it was not that severe. It ended up being, by comparison, it was 8.5. So there was like a savings, if you will, of 6.4 million, less of a need to use that much of fund balance.
And then that, just because I always go back to the 5-year projections, because that allowed you to end up, in my calculations, $2 million more in fund balance than you had started the 5-year projection with.
Yes, the actual numbers I believe are that much higher than what's reflected in the 5-year.
So the low of 7.3 that we see projected in 25, if we follow that same projection, we should now be up at 9.
To increase that up accordingly.
Yeah, but it gave me more confidence noting that that's the way it was going.
Yes, a much better landing spot at the end of
Right.
23. And Jeff made the comment at the last meeting about fund balance policy, the 5%. It is 5%. It's 5% of your adopted expenditure budget for the year. And in that regard, like our expenditure budget is, I mean, it's huge because of that, those ARPA funds that are in play. But if you follow the guideline and you apply to that, the 5% it's not quite 5.5 million is sort of a guide. Don't go below that. Don't go below that number. So we're off again at the end of 23. We're down to 14.6 million. So that's roughly $9 million. Yes, $9 million above that fund balance. So I feel that's not too bad. Yeah. I'm used to the cash being so much higher, and in that with cash at the end of 2021, the city was at 27 million, and now we're down to the end of 23, 19.6. But that's not so bad when you think about the in-between and back payments of over 20 million, 20.3 million. So we could be much worse. So that reflects some good results, good managing results of the city's revenue expenditures. And then the other schedule, it's stapled together. This gives you, the first page gives a nice look. And this Madras has seen this repeatedly every month with our monthly filing with the DCED report. but this gives a nice glimpse of a quarterly look of 2023. And there's a little more detail here with, not so much on revenue, but we break down our expenditures by the city's functions. And I'm not going to go through the next few pages because that's too much. But all that is every month when I look at our report that goes to MADRA, we compare year to date, where we are year to date, the end of January, where we are at the end of April. And just to try to identify why, revenues are comparing differently. There's the top half of that, those next few pages of revenue. What's interesting about revenue, I think it's the third page back, I highlighted, very comparable. The city, we did, for 2023, we did 76.8 million. In prior year 22, it was 77.1. That's very close. And same thing with expenditures. If you go to the last page of the handout, down at the bottom for December, the year to dates, what I highlighted last year for 22, we had those prior year encumbrances, which I always had to break in and add that to our expenditures for the month. But if you look at 23, 80.3 million versus for 22, a little over 81 million. So a nice comparison there from an analytical view, kind of a high view, but the results are nice to report. That's my presentation. Sorry, I don't have the nice colors and charts. Hard to follow that.
Well, we do appreciate your hand highlighting.
Well, yeah, I did, manual highlight.
Any questions?
Thank you, Brian,
Brian.
very thorough.
Thank you, Brian, very thorough. It really makes it seem like we're starting 2024 on a good foot. Do you have anything you want to add, Marita?
I think that the two of them have taken the words out of my mouth.
Okay. Well, then, we are on to Jeffrey's report.
Yeah, I actually have a third item, but I'll start with the two that are on the
Okay.
agenda. You all received a copy of the January 24th paid bills report. Everything is going swimmingly with our finances for the authority. We are ending the period with a balance of $193,365.26 to begin 2024. And if you have any questions about any of the invoices on our paid bills list, don't hesitate to ask. And the second item is also noted, which is that we did our required filing of 1099s for our consulting fees. So that has to be postmarked by the end of January, and they've gone out the door. So everybody who needs to get a 1099 will get a 1099 from the ICA. We used a service this year. Thank you for your permission to do so. It would cost a little bit of money, $37. We don't have very many. $37 well spent, I will tell you, compared to me trying to do 1099s with a pen and paper. It was much better just to spend the money and use the service. So thank you. And then the third item, which isn't on the agenda, is that the chair has brought to my attention that our next scheduled meeting is April of 2024. And in the interim, we have to file our report.
Well, we just have to prepare.
Our report
Yeah.
for the state. So I'll let you make those comments about how you'd like to proceed with that then,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
And I think one of the things, if you could
Yes,
go back or not go back, just send everyone the actual months that we've committed to meeting,
yes, if you have.
so that we have those officially on the calendar.
Absolutely.
I know we have this room in case we need to have additional
Correct.
meetings. But if everyone could just know what those are. And relative to the section 203 report, you'll remember that that's the report we make to the appointing authorities about our observations of the city for 2023. It requires coordination that Jeffrey has with Marita for certain updates. And then he will likely call on several of us to read sections, take a look at it and see if it's presented appropriately. Jeffrey and I were talking before the meeting, and we have gotten it down to a good system, sort of a grind for Jeffrey,
Yeah, well,
but still a grind that's moving. And so I think it should be even a little easier this year.
I'll speak for myself when I say I will miss the participation of Mr. Barton in the process. But we will, I am sure we will rise to the occasion.
Yes.
Take care.
Ralph was always such a good wordsmith.
He was.
Although, Doug is.
I
That was
heard the
wacky,
rumor, so.
that was
I don't think
wacky,
we should
actually.
have that either.
But
We still
anyway,
have talent, yes.
so everyone get ready to be called on, and we'll make sure that we're ready to at least talk about it, if not approve it in final form, perhaps at the April meeting.
Correct.
Because it's due on April 30th. Any other questions for Jeffrey? And if not, any other business, new business that anyone has? And if not, I'll turn it over to you for a public comment.
We do have some members of the public. I don't know if French from DCED have any questions for us.
It's nice to see everyone.
Always good to see you, Madras.
For a couple of weeks, but nice to see everybody here. And then Brian, we appreciate the thoroughness of your reports, even though they don't have charts.
Mike, it's gonna be a continuing theme all year. Or Janelle, thank you.
Thank you. We have handouts. Yes, I'll get you a copy of the handouts. Excellent. No other questions? Mark? Okay, thank you. Back to the chair.
Knowing of no other business to be conducted, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And we are finished with our first meeting of 2024. Thank you all for being here and for your continuing engagement with the ICA.
4:12 p.m.
I thought